So this week we are going to be creating the database and tables for your term project. So in order for you to do that, there are two chapters that we need to go through, chapter 11 and chapter 12. Chapter 11 has really critical information on how to use SQL to create the database, create the table, and also to create indexing. It talks about constraints, how to specify primary keys and foreign keys, and other constraints to make sure that the data in the table is accurate. So you're going to want to read through the chapter and go through the lecture demo. The commands that you're going to be learning are DDL commands. They deal with the database and the table and the structure of the table and create objects that are stored in the database itself. So DDL commands are things like create and drop and alter. Okay, those are all DDL commands. DML commands basically deal with manipulating data. So it's inserting rows and deleting rows, anything dealing with the data. Whereas DDL is the structure of the database and the tables. Okay, so there's kind of a big difference between the two. So we are covering DDL commands, and you will learn how to create a database, how to delete a database, how to create tables, and how to add constraints to ensure that the data is accurate. And so this is a list of constraints that are frequently used. And so when you create your table, you'll use create table, which is the command. You'll give it a name. And then in parentheses, you will give it a unique column name. The column name needs to be unique within the table. You'll give it a data type. And then after the data type come constraints. So you'll notice that some columns don't have constraints. Okay, other columns do. So it just depends on what you want to store in those columns. Primary key is a constraint that you need to specify. You need a unique identifier for each row. And you can specify it here where you define the column, or you could specify it at the bottom of the table. Okay, and if you do it at the bottom of the table, you'll notice that in parentheses, you have to give it the name of the column that's the key. Either way works. This is called a column constraint, and this is called a table constraint, but they're both specifying the primary key. Not null is another constraint. This is typically a column constraint. And basically, you're just saying that that data is required. We also talk about how to copy data from one table to another, how to delete tables, and how to modify the columns. So how do I add a column? How do I drop a column? How do I change a column type? So let's say you make a mistake and something should be variable character and you have it as integer. How do you fix that? Okay, you have to use alter table, and then it's alter column. Okay, alter table, alter column. And then we talk about indexing. So the only index that is automatically created is the one for the primary key, and that is a clustered index. You can create non-clustered indexes as well, and those are typically done on foreign keys. They are also done on any column that you use a lot in a where clause. So if you have a lot of select queries that have a where clause that use a particular column, you will want to do a non-clustered index because that will make your query run faster. Okay, so understanding how the data is organized is important. There's test questions on your certification exam about this. So very carefully read through the section on how the data is organized and indexing. Pay attention to other types of indexing because there will be questions on your exam dealing with this. Constraints are something that we do work with. Not null and primary key are ones that we typically use. We also create foreign key constraints so that we can relate our tables. When I create a table, I don't really worry about the foreign key constraint yet. I usually do that after I create the tables before I add data. The constraints that I tend to add when I add a table are the primary key, identity column. If I want the primary key to auto number, okay, so I don't have to enter data. I specify an identity constraint because then the SQL Server will automatically number it for me. The check constraint is one that I also use. It helps you ensure that the data is accurate. So in this case, we have a column called invoice total. The data type is money. And we're saying that it has to be greater than or equal to 0, which makes total sense. Another constraint that is helpful is setting a default value, okay, especially if it has something to do with money or if it's numeric. So as primary key goes, you can do column or table constraints. Any of these can be column or table constraints. You'll notice that here's a check constraint that is a table constraint. Okay, up here we have them as column constraints. Okay, so here's a primary key constraint that is a table constraint. So the only advantage of doing it this way is the fact that you can give it a name. Anytime you give a constraint a name, you can remove it if you change your mind. If you don't give it a name, you cannot remove it. You'd have to actually get rid of the entire table. Okay, so that would be the only advantage of using a table constraint. Foreign key constraints. As I said, I don't usually do these when I create the table. I will do the other constraints, but you can actually add a foreign key constraint after the tables are all created. And that's usually what I do. I worry about getting them created and then I worry about relating them. But if you wanted to add the foreign key constraint when you're creating the table, if you do it on the column level, it's just foreign key references. And then this is the table and the column that you are connecting to. So a foreign key connects to a column that is a primary key in another table. So this person ID column is the primary key in the person table. And this is just saying we're connecting to it. One really important thing that students miss is that the data types have to be the same. So person ID over in this person table has to be an integer if we are going to try to connect to it here. They have to have the same data type. So this is done at the column level. This is the same thing done at the table level. the difference. We can give it a name. Because we can give it a name, if we change our mind, we can delete it. So the full syntax for a foreign key is this. So this first part is required, and the second part is optional, but the second part does help keep the data accurate. So basically what onDelete is saying is what do you want to happen if the primary key is deleted? So let's say we had employees and benefits and the employee got deleted. What would we want happen to their benefits? Well, if they're no longer an employee, we'd probably want them deleted. So we'd say on delete, we'd want it to cascade, right? So on delete cascade means that if the primary key gets deleted, we want the foreign key to be deleted too. Okay, just remove everything. No action means that, well, even if the primary key is removed, we don't want this data to be removed, this related data. So an example would be if I have a customer that has placed orders and the customer no longer wants to be my customer, I would delete them from the customer table, but I don't want to delete any of their prior orders. So I would say on delete, no action. So you really have to think with on delete if you need that related data or not. Usually with update, which is the other thing you have to think about, updates are usually cascaded. And what that means is if the primary key is changed, so I have an employee, if their employee number changes, then in the benefits table, I need that foreign key employee number to change too, because they have to stay in sync. Or if I have a customer number and they've placed orders and the customer number changes, I need that number to change in all of the orders to keep them in sync. So usually on update is set to cascade, okay, because everything needs to match up, okay? But on delete is something that you really have to think through whether you want to keep that data or not. Check constraints, as I mentioned, are used to keep your data accurate. So they are usually little checks. This check is making sure that the vendor code is a letter or a number. Okay, so, and it's actually making sure that we have a letter, a number, a number, a number, a number. So it's specifically specifying a format. And then it's doing another little check here too. So that is a pretty extensive check to make sure that it's accurate. Here it's checking age. Okay, and as I mentioned, it's just trying to keep the data accurate. And as I mentioned, I'll do like the not null, the primary key, and check constraints when I create the table. I will also add default values. I typically will do the foreign key constraint after the table has been created. And if you do that, you have to use the alter table command. And then it's kind of add constraint. You can give it a name, indicate the kind of constraint. Okay, so you'll see an example of that when we take a look at the final project. Okay, so carefully read through this. If there's an interactive link, I encourage you guys to do that because that's how you learn. Then you're going to do the assignment, which gives you practice on all of those DDL commands. And then each task has a video that shows you how to do it. Then we get into chapter 12. Chapter 12 basically shows you how to do the SQL commands using SSMS instead of actually keying in the commands in the new query window. I don't recommend doing it this way because this is specific to an application. And using code, you can use code anywhere. MySQL, any other application, the SQL commands will work. The reason I'm showing you the chapter 12 is sometimes you run into things in SSMS and SQL Server where, for whatever reason, the SQL command does not work, and the only way to execute it is to use the interface. So this basically summarizes how to use the interface to do all of those DDL commands. Okay, so you can read through this. You can see it's all dealing with the interface. Okay. And at the bottom, I do tell you how to generate scripts, because what you guys are going to be turning in to me is the code. I need the SQL code because I'm going to recreate all of your databases and tables. And so if you use the interface, it's kind of a problem because you have no code. So down here, I am telling you how to get the code. And then I do have a textbook assignment on this, just to give you a little practice with the interface. It's kind of a short assignment just because, like I said, I really would prefer that you guys get used to doing the code rather than the interface. So this is a rather short assignment. Then we get into term project. So this is not due for 2 weeks. What you're doing at this point is you are creating your tables. You're creating the database, creating the tables, and you are adding your constraints. And then next week, you're going to be actually adding data. So you'll be doing part of it this week, part of it next week, and then turning all of it in. So the part that you can do this week: create your database, create your tables, and create the indices. So I have a couple different examples for you. I have this example of my fictional business. And you can see that I pretty much stuck to the not null and primary keys here. And then I have Sugar Bakers, which is another database. And again, I pretty much stuck to not null and primary keys. Once you've got your table set up, then I do the foreign key constraint. I do these separate just because this is something that you actually could get errors on. So, and the errors, as I mentioned, they are typically, so this is trying to relate the zip codes. And so I've got a customer table. So I'm taking the zip code from that table and trying to connect it to the zip code in my zip code table. If the zip code in my customer table was integer and the zip code in my zip code table was character, this would create an error. Okay. And you'll notice that I am updating, I'm cascading my updates. And the only one where I'm actually doing a delete on is this one. Because if they delete the order, then I want them to delete the order details, which makes sense. That's the only one where I'm doing a cascade on deleting. Then this is the sugar baker example, kind of the same thing, where I'm adding these foreign key constraints. And as I mentioned, this is one where you could end up with errors. And if you get an error, just email me. So I am going to actually need to see all of your tables, how they are set up, and your code for the foreign keys in order for me to help you. Okay, because like I said, there's usually something out of sync. And after you get done with the tables and the foreign keys, you can do the indices. So you should have an index on, at a minimum, the foreign key. Okay. And then if there is another column that you think you might use an aware clause, you can do an index on that. All of mine happen to be on the foreign keys because at this point, I don't know what I'm going to be doing selects on. So once you finish all of that, you can do your database diagram. And this is where you're going to tell if there's a problem because it's going to show you how all of the tables connect based on the primary and foreign keys. Okay, so then you should be able to back up your database as well. And once you are done backing up that database, then you can submit the database and the table creation code. So if you saved your scripts like I did, okay, you can submit those. Otherwise, if you used SSMS commands, which I would prefer that you didn't, but if you did, you are going to have to generate scripts. And so I have an example of what those look like. And what you are going to have to turn in are the scripts and the backup for your database. Okay, and this isn't due for 2 weeks. Okay, so you have plenty of time to get this done. Then we have a quiz. And I know these quizzes are not easy, but the way that the questions are written is almost identical to what you're going to see on the certification exam. So you have to get used to the way the questions are formatted. And you do get 3 attempts at this. If there is something that you don't understand, let me know. Probably before you do it 3 times. Okay. Preferably after the first time. If there was a question you found confusing, ask before you do it 3 times. And it is open book, open note, no time limit, which is different than your certification exam. That is closed book and it has a time limit. Okay. So yeah, you get 3 attempts on that. And so hopefully you guys will be a little more used to that format and it'll be a little easier for you. Additional resources down here. I just put this here in case you are confused about anything that was covered this week. If you have questions or if you run into problems, please let me know. This is actually a super important week for your term project and basically understanding what you can do in SQL. So let me know if you have questions or you run into problems. Hope you guys all have a great week.